So, good morning, Felipe. Good morning, Vitor. We are starting today what's supposed to be our last theoretical class on syntax. Okay, today the topic is auxiliary verbs. So, we have been studying what we call the lexical verbs. The class before, we discussed lexical verbs. Now, what are lexical verbs? Basically they are not verbs that work as auxiliary verbs. They are those verbs that we call the main verb of the sentence, of the clause. Yeah? The auxiliary verbs are those that are associated with another verb, which is the main verb. Okay, so auxiliary verbs can be split into two smaller groups: the modal ones, that you are familiar with, like can, may, must, will, shall, what to, need, and etc. And the non-modal ones that we are going to discuss in detail: be, have, and do. So the usage of these auxiliary verbs um, is basically in two most frequent situations that involve the subject and auxiliary verb inversion and negation. Okay, so when we come across the need of creating a sentence in the interrogative, or uh, establish a negative sentence, create a negative sentence, then auxiliary verbs tend to appear. It does not mean that they are not there in affirmative sentences, but in some sentences they are kind of hidden. Let's use this term here, hidden, but they are there. Like as in, for example, I went there, uh, or no, I went there is not a good verb because it's in the past. Let's get a sentence in the present. I I like ice cream. And when you want to emphasize, you put a do. I do like ice cream. So the do is always there, but it's hidden in the regular canonical affirmative sentence, positive sentence. But when you emphasize, this auxiliary verb appears. Okay, so basically, when we talk about auxiliary verbs, we are talking about these two features here: the inversion of the subject and the verb, the auxiliary verb, when you make a question, and the placing of a not beside the auxiliary verb when you are producing a negative clause. So, uh, in case A, subject auxiliary inversion, we have seen that in canonical clauses, the subject precedes the verb. So we have subject, verb, and complement, as I told you, the regular structure of a canonical clause. Whereas in most interrogative main clauses, the subject follows the first verb. So the verb that precedes the subject, this verb that's before the subject, must be an auxiliary verb. Only auxiliary verbs can invert with the subject. So in I am a student, am I a student? We normally don't ask this question unless we lose our recent memory. But in this am I a student, B is playing the role, in fact, both roles. We call it copula, and we are going to discuss it by the end of the class. But it also plays the role of auxiliary verb. Okay, it is the main verb, but it's the auxiliary. Let's take a simpler case, like in 1A. She has taken the car. If you look at the function, at the role played by the verb to have, we see that has is part of the structure has taken, which is what I call the verb capsule. Okay, and this is the main verb, and this is the auxiliary verb. How do you know that? Because when you ask the question, you have this kind of inversion in 2A here. Has she taken the car? Okay. differently from this ungrammatical construction. She took the car, which is the declarative. Took she the car is ungrammatical. What would be the grammatical version?
Did you take?
Did she take? So we have to use the plain form of the verb to take, instead of took, and we should place a did here. And how do you know that? Well, the emphatic version for this sentence, she took the car, is she did take the car. This is the emphatic. When you want to emphasize the fact, you put the verb in the plain form and you place a did. She did take the car. So when you invert, you have the interrogative. Okay. So if the declarative does not contain an auxiliary, as in 1b here, she took the car, it is necessary to insert the auxiliary do so that the inversion can apply. Did she take the car? Is the result of this. As you already know, this do has no meaning, I mean, no semantic meaning. It is simply inserted to satisfy the grammatical rule requiring an auxiliary. Now, in the case of negation, and believe me, this word negation does exist. I went to the dictionary to look for it because I found the word strange. I would say negative clauses instead, but negation is a noun that does exist in English. So negation, the construction where not is used to negate the verb, likewise requires that the verb be an auxiliary. Take the examples. She has taken the car and she took the car. This is the present and the past versions of the positive clause. Now, in the negative version, she has not taken the car. So here I have the verb capsule, has not taken, and not is placed beside the auxiliary verb have, and taken is the participle version, the participle form of the main verb. So she took not the car is the ungrammatical version. What would be the grammatical version? She put the verb in the plain form. She did not take the car. So every time, so we must put a did here plus a not, and take. So what we need here is to place the auxiliary, to make the auxiliary appear in this ungrammatical sentence in order to correct it. So we use auxiliary verb, not, and the plain form of the verb. Again, if there is no auxiliary in the positive, do must be inserted to form the negative. She did not take. This is the verb capsule, the car. Auxiliaries, but not lexical verbs, have negative forms ending in the suffix an apostrophe t, which is the contracted version. It's never possible to add an apostrophe t in the contracted form with main verbs, only with auxiliary verbs. Uh,
Uh, Here's the
yes.
thing. Well, sometimes we come across things like uh needn't and haven't,
Well,
when
haven't.
this haven't isn't necessarily an auxiliary verb.
Yeah, I haven't,
Yes.
like, I haven't a car. Yeah.
Yeah, like
This
haven't you anything to say? Something like that.
Oh, in this case, have is an auxiliary. We are going to explore the role of have, be, and do, as auxiliary verbs.
I see.
Needn't. Needn't is a construction that sometimes can be used as an auxiliary, can behave as an auxiliary, but it's falling into disuse, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's becoming ungrammatical. Yeah, it
Mm-hmm.
was not ungrammatical. It was something that was present in the language since medieval English, but it's falling into disuse. Okay, so
Yeah,
need
definitely.
is basically a lexical verb, but sometimes it can be applied as if it were an auxiliary, but it's not. Okay, not in modern English. Okay, so considering this, the not contraction form, the contracted form of not, can only be placed uh, after auxiliary verbs, never after main verbs. Okay. Um, so again, auxiliaries, but not lexical verbs, have negative forms ending in the suffix n apostrophe t or take a not after them. Okay, we never put a not after lexical verbs. The non-modal auxiliaries are be, have, and do. We have the modal auxiliaries, which are the modal verbs. What are the modal verbs? Are those that you use to modalize sentences, like may. He may have arrived by 7. So you, with modal verbs, you reduce the degree of certainty of assertiveness of a sentence. That's why we say you should modalize your text, not to be so assertive. Okay, so the non-modal auxiliaries are be, have, and do. So do is used in constructions like subject and auxiliary inversion and negation when required to satisfy a need for an auxiliary, especially in the present tense. Of course, we have their past version, its past version, did. Did and do are exactly the same thing, the same verb, only with inflection in tense. So there is also a lexical verb do, the verb to do, lexical, which means to do something. Okay, yeah. I'm going to do my homework. And this do is lexical. Okay. And it's used in clauses like she did her best. In this case, did here is not an auxiliary. It is a lexical verb. Or I did him an injustice, or etc. Okay. Here then auxiliary do must be added to form interrogatives and negatives. Look, we have two occurrences of do here. One as an auxiliary verb and another one as the main verb. Did she do her best? Or an auxiliary plus not here, I didn't, and a main verb do in I didn't do him an injustice. Okay? Do you see the difference between the first use of do and the second? It does not appear in the first affirmative sentence. She did her best. We have only one do, which is lexical. But when we make interrogative sentences or when we make negative sentences, this do, auxiliary do, appears. Okay, is this clear for you that we have two instances of do being used, one as an auxiliary verb and the other one as the main verb? Can you see that?
Yes,
Okay,
it's clear.
so let's go to be. We have three uses of be that can be distinguished, and we are going to illustrate in these examples. We have be in the first case as a progressive marker. What is a progressive marker? It's that be that will prepare the second verb in the ing form, in the gerund participle form, which marks tenses, for example, like present continuous or present perfect continuous. Okay, like here, they are watching TV. The question for these is, are they watching TV? So as you can see, to form the question, I have to invert subject and verb. And when we invert subject and verb, we have a clue that this verb that is inverted with the subject is an auxiliary. Okay. Or in the case of be, I've been working all morning. So in this case here, be is a progressive marker. We have three verbs here. I've been working. This is the auxiliary for present for present perfect continuous. This is the progressive marker that will prepare the ing form. So let's call it PM, progressive marker, which is also a form of being an auxiliary verb. And this is the main verb in the gerund participle. Okay. Questions about this? Do you see be as an auxiliary here? Not as a classical auxiliary verb that is inverted with the subject, because this is a compound verb tense. This is present perfect continuous. Okay. But being continuous requires a verb to be before the main verb in the ing form. This is another way of being an auxiliary verb. Okay. Be can also be used as a passive marker. So it will prepare passive voice. It will prepare a verb in the passive form. It was taken by Jill. What is the interrogative? Was it taken by Jill? So the clue that this was, this be in the past, is an auxiliary verb. Or he may be arrested. In this case, in the interrogative form, what is the version? What is the interrogative version for this? He may be arrested.
May he?
Yeah, may he. So you may say, okay, teacher, but may is the classical auxiliary verb because may is inverted with he to form the interrogative. And you are right, but be is playing the role of an auxiliary verb to the extent that it prepares the participle form of the verb to arrest. So be is serving arrest, okay? Be is preparing arrest as a passive marker, okay? Be is a passive marker here, okay? And number 3 is what we call a situation of copula, okay? In which be behaves both as the auxiliary verb and the main verb, because there is no other verb. So be plays both roles. And how do I know be is an auxiliary? She was a friend of his. Question, was she a friend of his? So there is inversion. If there is inversion, be is an auxiliary. But take a look. Was is the only verb. And all clauses must have at least one verb that we call the main verb. So be is also the main verb. Or that is very likely to happen. Okay? Is that very likely to happen? But is the only verb. So it should be the main verb as well. We call this situation copula when it's auxiliary, and at the same time, the only and main verb of the clause. Okay? Questions about this? So these are the three possibilities, the three uses of be as progressive marker, passive marker, or situations of copula, okay, in which it is both auxiliary and main verb. We will explore each use in no time. As a progressive marker, for example, we have they are watching TV or I've been working all morning. In both cases, be is succeeded by a verb in the ing form. So in one, in these two examples in one, where be is followed by a verb in the gerund participle form, it is a marker of progressive aspect. It generally serves to indicate that the situation, the action, the event, the state, or whatever was, is, or will be in progress at the time in question. Okay, so these are the three forms in terms of verb tense for be: was happening, is happening, or will be happening. And be prepares this ing verb, this gerund participle verb. Do you all agree with that? Do you all follow the path?
It's clear.
Yeah.
Okay. As a passive marker, which is case 2, we have two examples. It was taken by Jill, and he may be arrested. Here we have be in the past, simple, in the preterite form, in fact, and here in the plain form. So the clauses in 2 are passive. In 2a, yeah, it was taken by Jill, is the passive counterpart of the active Jill took it. Okay, so what do I mean by passive counterpart? It is the passive version of Jill took it. It's a paraphrase of Jill took it. Okay, the presence of be being one of the major differences between the two forms. Okay, so the new element here from Jill took the book, and the book was taken by Jill, is the presence of the verb to be. The book was taken. Okay, so there is no active counterpart, on the other hand, for this clause here. He may be arrested because the later has no paraphrase. There's no way to paraphrase this. He may be arrested. Is it? Well, the police may arrest him, but then we have to put a subject. We have to bring again a new element, the police, or they may arrest him. So we have to use another pronoun. Okay. So I'd say that there's no active counterpart unless we make lots of modifications into be, because the later this sentence, the later sentence has no has no paraphrase. This by is lost here. I'm sorry. Let me change it. It's a typing error. There's no paraphrase. Okay. And the third case of copula, in which be is both main verb and auxiliary. She was a friend of his, and that is very likely. That's very likely to happen. That's very likely to be dangerous. You complete it the way you want. Okay, so in 3, be is the only verb, but it still behaves as an auxiliary. This is very important. Although it's the only verb, it still behaves as an auxiliary. Now, what do I mean by it still behaves as an auxiliary? It is still inverted with the subject. And it is still the verb that will receive a not when we produce a negative version. So the interrogative of this is, was she a friend of his? And the negative is, in the second case, that is not very likely to happen. Okay? So we call it copula because the verb merges both functions, auxiliary and main verb. Though it receives a not in negative version, and though it's inverted with the subject in interrogative, it is also the only verb of the clause. So, by consequence, it is the main one. If it's the only, it should be the main. Questions so far?
No, it's fine.
Now let's talk about have. Have belongs to both lexical and auxiliary classes. As we discussed in, I think it was Luis that asked, I don't know, I don't remember. I think it was Luis Felipe that asked about
Yeah, it
haven't.
was me.
Yeah, uh, I haven't. Uh, I haven't a car. I haven't a house. Okay, there is a lexical use. There is also a copula use of the verb to have, but it's falling into this use. Okay, and classically, have as an auxiliary is used for those compound verb tenses like the perfect tenses. Okay, so anyway, this verb belongs to both lexical and auxiliaries because uh, similar to do, that we have the do to perform something, to do something, and we have the do auxiliary, we have the have auxiliary for perfect tenses, and we have the have meaning to be the owner of something, or to indicating some kind of possession. Okay, like I have a girlfriend. Okay, so that's why we say it belongs to both lexical, which is those regular verbs like play, do, go, stay, and auxiliary, the modals, and be, have, and do. Okay. Take a look at this sentence. She had a swim. Okay. Consider just this. Shouldn't be in boldface type because it would confuse you. In she had a swim, it is a lexical verb. Why? The interrogative and negative counterparts are, did she have a swim? She didn't have a swim. So the real auxiliary verb here is do. In both cases, do is an auxiliary and have is what we call the main verb. And consequently, it is a lexical verb. Lexical verbs are those main verbs. Okay? So there's no much difference talking about main verbs and lexical verbs. Okay? Now, the auxiliary uses are seen in these next two cases as a perfect marker. For example, he has broken his leg. So, has broken. We have two verbs. This is the verb capsule. Let me highlight the verb capsule for you here. This is the verb capsule, has broken, in which the main verb is, what is the main verb? And he has broken his leg. What is the most important verb of this verb capsule in purple?
Broken.
Broken is the main verb. and has is the auxiliary. And how do you know that? You know that by producing interrogative and negative versions. He has not broken his leg. So have takes a not after it. Has he broken his leg? The verb to have is inverted with the subject to form the interrogative. So basically, it's that thing that I told you last class that when we have an auxiliary and a main verb, the auxiliary verb will take all the job to be done. The auxiliary verb is responsible for being inflected to its negative version or for being inverted with the subject. Até brinquei com a coisa do estagiário, o verbo estagiário. Ele faz tudo. Okay, so we have also the static have as a static verb, like she has enough credit. Okay, and we have to invite them all, like in constructions, like have to indicate something that is mandatory. Okay, now she has enough credit. What is the interrogative version of this?
Uh, has she enough credit?
Does she have? Yeah. So it behaves as an auxiliary verb. Although this has she enough credit is sometimes used, especially in European version of English, but we have to invite them all. What is the interrogative? Again, do we have to invite
Johnny.
them all? Okay. In this case, this have is working with the infinitive of the verb to invite, okay, to indicate uh, something that is mandatory to do. And she has enough credit, it's indicating a state of being. Having credit is not doing anything, is being somehow. Yeah. The this have is a static verb. Okay. Now, as a perfect marker, we say that the perfect is marked by the auxiliary have plus a past participle, a verb in the participle form. So it's best regarded as a secondary past tense, okay? Or some people call it a compound past tense. The primary past tense being the inflectional preterite, okay? So present perfect, all those verb tenses that you call perfect, future perfect, they are what we call secondary tenses, secondary verb tenses, or compound verb tenses. Note, for example, that the preterite is found only in finite constructions, such as he took it yesterday. So it can't occur after May. Okay. Um, Let me try to explain it. When we talk about finite constructions, we talk about situations that happened and are done. They are finished. And in these cases, we use the simple preterite, the famous simple past. When we use present perfect, we are talking about actions that started in the past and somehow had a certain period of duration or a certain influence in the present. Okay. Now I say that in these finite constructions, like he took it yesterday, it can't occur after May. Why? Because May should take an infinitival clause as a complement. What is an infinitival clause? Is a clause which in which the verb is in the infinitive form. That's why perfect have is used instead in to be. He may have taken it yesterday. You cannot say he may take it yesterday. It would be no sense, nonsense, okay? So you need another auxiliary verb. You have may as an auxiliary and have as an auxiliary as well. But this may is an auxiliary, a modal one, to modalize the sentence, to indicate a possibility. And this have is an auxiliary for the preparation to mark the coming of a participle, the appearance of a participle of the verb to take. So he may have taken it yesterday. I don't know if it's clear for you. Is that why we should not, why we can't use uh, took after may? There's no he may took. He may have taken. Is it clear why? Because may will require an infinitival form of the next verb. And that's why we use a perfect marker and a verb in the participle. Is that clear? That we have two auxiliaries here and a main verb. We have three verbs. The first two are auxiliaries. And in fact, the first one is an auxiliary. The second one is an auxiliary with the function of perfect marker. And the third one, finally, is the main verb in its not passive, sorry, in its participle form. Right, guys?
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
So, since have itself can inflect for tense, can't it? Have, past, had. Okay. One way is doubly marked for tense. Take a look at 1a. He has broken his leg. So we have a mark for verb tense in have, and we have a mark for verb tense in broken. This verb tense here being the simple present, and this one, or the plain present, to use a more technical term, and this one, the participle form. So it is called past with present. The past being marked by the lexeme have, and the present by the inflection on it. Okay. Have on itself, the appearance of have as an auxiliary indicates that it's about the past. Although the verb is used in its plain present form. Do you know what I mean? The perfect tenses with have, I have finished my homework. Well, although I use have and a verb in the participle, I'm talking about the past, something I have done in the past with a present consequence. That's why we say it's past with present. It's expressing the past, but using a verb with a present structure. Okay? This reflects the fact that while the event of his breaking his leg is located in past time, it is seen as having relevance to the present. That's why we say past with present. The most likely scenario is that his leg has not yet healed, so that he is at present incapacitated. Okay, just a kind of example uh, for you to realize the use of present perfect. Is not this that textbooks, grammar books tell us that we use present perfect to talk about a past event with a present consequence, or to talk about a past event that happened during a certain period of time, in which uh, time is not relevant, the action is relevant. It's another way to explain present perfect. Simple past, time is relevant. Present perfect, action is relevant, time is not. This is there are three explanations, basically three explanations that we find in textbooks for using the present perfect. So we call it past with present because something that happened in the past and is expressed with a structure that I'd say morphologically is in the present, is with an inflection of third person singular present here has. Okay. The present tense component also explains why it is not normally possible to add an adjunct like yesterday. He has broken his leg yesterday. There is a contradiction here. When we use present perfect, most books will tell us that action is what really matters, not when it happened. So this time expression here, this adjunct, this adverbial form is not necessary because the focus is in the verb to break. He has broken. This is what is really relevant for me. Not when, what happened, not when it happened. Have you learned present perfect like this? Have you seen this kind of explanation on when to use and when not to use present perfect?
Yes, I have seen that.
Yes.
Yeah. So most teachers and most books say, take a look at what is more relevant, when it happened or what happened. If the important thing is what happened and when it happened is irrelevant or you won't mention, use present perfect. If when it happened is really important, then use simple past. Now, an example of static have. Have in the two examples of to, denotes a state of being. Unlike of she had a swim. In she had a swim, we have a dynamic have. It denotes an event. In she has enough credit, having credit, it's it's not an action. You're not doing anything. It's a situation you are in. Okay. And we have to invite them all the same thing. You are facing something that is mandatory. You are in a situation in which you have to do something. Okay. So she had a swim is dynamic. She's performing an action. I have a house. Okay, this is the present state. I have many debts with the bank. This is a financial state of being. Yeah. So there is a difference between the dynamic and the static have. So usage is divided as to whether static have is an auxiliary or a lexical verb. So grammars are not do not have a consensus about this. If we should consider this have an auxiliary verb or a lexical verb. Those who say she has not enough credit will treat have as an auxiliary verb or have we to invite them all. Okay? Those who use this kind of constructions are treating have as an auxiliary. Okay. While those that say she does not have, which in fact is the majority of people, okay, this is the dominant version in modern English, especially in modern American English. Those who say she does not have enough credit or do we have to invite them all are treating have as a lexical verb. From what you learn, lexical verbs are always main verbs. And auxiliary verbs are inverted with the subject and receive a not after them in negative clauses. Is this clear now, the case of have, of the static have, and how to treat it? You asked me a question, Luis, at the very beginning of the class about this have. Oh, teacher, I see some uses like I haven't money. I haven't this, I haven't that. This is using have as an auxiliary. In fact, as both, yeah, as a case of copula. And the second one is using have exclusively as a lexical verb. When we use do as an auxiliary, we are electing have as the main verb of the clause and consequently a lexical verb. Is this clear for you at the moment?
Yes, yes, it is, teacher.
So many people use both constructions, though the lexical verb treatment has been gaining ground for some time. And I'd say it's a tendency that it will be dominant, okay? Because of the tendency of American English to uh, keep this status of a worldwide spoken language, okay? So these are the three auxiliary verbs that we had to treat with more detail because the other ones are the modal verbs, okay? And the modal verbs, they behave exactly the same way as I told you before. The modal ones you are familiar with are can, may, must, will, shall, ought to, need, dare, could, might. They are past versions, yeah? So basically, what do they have in common? I'd like to know if the verb is an auxiliary verb. What should I do? I should test two paraphrases of the clause I'm dealing with. The first paraphrase is its interrogative version, and the second paraphrase is its negative form. If the verb takes not, and if the verb is also inverted to form questions, then it's an auxiliary. If it's an auxiliary, it is either be, have, and do, else it's one of these modal verbs. Okay. Now, what is the use of modal verbs? What does it mean to use a modal verb? This exercise might be wrong. Is it the same as saying this exercise is wrong? Let me go to the word processor for a moment. Let me stop the presentation here and open Word. Okay, take a look here for a moment. What you did was wrong. Let's put it a period just to be canonical. What you did may have been wrong. Do these sentences mean the same thing?
Not really.
And what's the difference, semantically
One
speaking?
one of them is more certain, and the other one is there has like a possibility open to interpretation.
Yeah, this one is assertive. This one is modalized. It's not with Z. No, not moralized. It's modalized. And it's not with Z because I'm choosing a British, but okay. Doesn't recognize linguistic terms. It's modalized. So what you did was wrong is assertive. I'm sure it was wrong. What you did may have been wrong. May will reduce the degree of assertiveness of a sentence. All the modal verbs play the same role. Let's do something, for example, using uh, maybe must, okay? When we use must, I must finish this paper for this afternoon. This indicates the mode of my finishing the paper. That's why model. Okay, I must finish. This is an obligation. This is something that is required. This is something that is a very strong uh, obligation. It's mandatory, almost mandatory. Now, when I put a not, what is the effect? I must not finish. Isn't it exactly the opposite? It is not really need. It's not really mandatory. It's optional. Okay. So modal verbs will modalize your sentence. They will reduce or reinforce the degree of certainty, the degree of assertiveness that you put in a sentence, in a clause. That's why in sciences like linguistics, discourse linguistics, discourse analysis, semantics, or uh, depending on the kind of semantics, of course, but enunciative semantics, we say that it's always a good idea when you are writing your papers, when you are writing your analysis, to modelize them, because we are never sure, since we are dealing with interpretation of discourse, we are never sure of what discourse means. We have a clue. That's why modal verbs are that important. Now, the focus of today's class was be, have, and do, because they are the most frequent auxiliary verbs. Okay, the modals are used in this kind of in those kinds of constructions that we need to reduce degrees of certainty, but be, have, and do are those more frequent auxiliary verbs. Okay, so this is supposedly the end um, of our discussion on auxiliary verbs. Okay. Oh, sorry, you are not seeing the slides. Do you have any question? Let me ask you a question. Like, let me see how you would react to a student, for example, in the classroom, asking you, "Teacher, why can't I say uh, had she a swim? Why do I have to use do?" How would you explain this to a student? A student that learned that have is an auxiliary verb for perfect tenses, and then in an unadvised way, let me open the word processor again. Being unaware to the use of the have as an auxiliary, we'll ask you a question like this. Just a moment. Folks, let's take the case of she had lunch with me. Okay, then the student asks you, "Teacher, why do I have to ask, did she have lunch with me, and not Had she lunch with me? I'm your student now. Why is this ungrammatical, teacher? Why can't I invert hadn't she? Why do I have to say did she have? Why do I have to say did she have and not had she lunch with me? Como que vocês sairiam dessa? Primeiro, vocês explicariam em português ou já dava para explicar em inglês? O cara que está aprendendo present perfect. Como que vocês abordariam isso?
I would say that had would be the main verb. This is the verb that is indicating the action.
Uhum.
So I would say that if I have an action verb instead of a static verb, for example, or like any other verbs that are indicating other things other than actions, I would have to use my auxiliary verb to do inverted.
Uhum.
But I don't know
Uhum.
if that's like the most appropriate
That's a good
answer.
explanation. That's a good explanation. Yeah. Well, I'm asking you this because it's time for us to talk about how I'm going to assess you on the second part of the subject. Okay, and one of the assessments will be on how able you became to deal with syntax and morphology from the perspective of someone who's going to be or who already is uh, a teacher. So probably there will be a kind of pedagogical question. Okay, a kind of question like an imaginary student asking you something and you having to explain and create pedagogical schemes, maybe drawing a board, drawing explanations on a whiteboard, uh, clarifying students' questions, misunderstandings, and so on. Okay, so the exam will be part practical, part theoretical, and part like how would you explain something, okay, like pedagogical, because we are forming teachers, so we have to, I'd like to see how you would explain subjects. And of course, when you are explaining to a language institute student or to a high school student, you are not giving the same explanation that you give in the university. So using terms like inflection or uh, the plain verb form or the infinitive or the infinitivo clause maybe would do in the university, but not in high school or in an elementary school class. So you should transport your university language and turn it into more accessible language for students that are acquiring, are learning, in fact, not acquiring, are learning a foreign language. Okay, so this is the kind of question that you may expect for the exam. Okay, I'll give you a standby, okay, for solving questions, for talking to me and clarifying what's not clear and discussing what has not been, what you are not convinced about, okay, next Thursday, okay. I know that the test, the exam, is programmed for this week, for the 22nd, but I decided to postpone it to the 27th so that you have time to study, talk with me. uh, I'll be here in Google Meet available for you. Okay. Uh, we can talk through video conference. We can talk during the week by mail, or through the telephone, WhatsApp, I mean, WhatsApp or whatever. Okay. So you can always send me an email. Do you have my correct email by now? I'll put it again here because Siga insists on letting there an email that does not exist anymore. They changed it and they didn't correct it. So my email is jose.uchoa@ufma.br. Okay, so you can always send me an email, teacher. Can you explain again that topic? Okay, and I'll put all the slides available for you. Okay, I'll make all the slides available for you in Google Drive. Now, I think the course is finished. Okay, and the video. Okay, the video for this class, all the others are already available. And I'd like to open these last minutes of class to hear from you what you thought of the course. You do not have the final grade, but I don't think we are going to have surprises. I mean, negative surprises. And I'd like to hear from you a feedback. I know I'm not the best syntaxist or morphologist because I'm not even a syntaxist or a morphologist. It's not my cup of tea. Okay, my cup of tea is discourse analysis, and somebody has to do this job, and it's me. I've been doing this for some time, but I'd like to hear from you. How did you feel about the subject? I open the word now and I give you the word to express. And please be honest. If you have to criticize, do it. We are open to criticisms, and criticisms makes us grow. Yes, you can speak.
Oh, okay. I would say that syntaxes and like phonetics and the everything regarding structures of words and etc. They are not my cup of tea either. It is something I actually struggle with a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have like an eager interest in in studying. Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I shouldn't have been flying under the radar when it comes to this module, but I kinda am. So this is like my 2 cents on this matter. Like it doesn't have anything wrong with the module at all. In fact, I'm glad that we had this opportunity to have this with you because I've heard about other ways and other approaches that were not as great as it is being now. Oh,
Thank you.
and I would like to commend you as well to conduct this module online. I know it is a struggle, and I know it is hard, and I bet you miss classrooms, not Google Meet at all. And that's it. Like I don't have like any negative criticisms at all besides my
Yeah,
own point of
one
view.
thing
Yeah.
I'm trying to do is like I'm searching for a textbook, because what I did here was basing myself on Michael Swan's grammar. But Michael Swan is a very thick book, and I have to, make choices. So I couldn't approach everything. So I mixed up kind of my experience as a language institute teacher. And I realized one thing that I realized, and I don't know if you share this feeling, is that I learned much more Portuguese grammar when I had to teach English grammar, because I had to learn English grammar to teach. And well, the way we learn English, many natives say, "Oh, you Brazilians speak so good English." Well, they mean so grammatical English, because we learn English as grammar. And if you look at the sections of textbooks, although they say they are communicative approach, in fact, what they are doing is putting conversations, unnatural conversations, based on grammar. So if they want to present you present perfect, they will fill the lesson with have been, have gone, have done, have stayed things. Yeah. And well, at least teaching morphosyntax helps me to keep updated and not let my English become that ungrammatical. And it helped me a lot teaching grammar. Uh, I do not demonize grammar as many people do because it helps us to understand our native language as well by comparison. So thank you for praising what I have done. Uh, I know, I'm pretty sure that there are people that do a better job than me because they are specialists on the area. My area is discursive linguistics, and of course, I prefer teaching language, culture, and identity for sure rather than morphosyntax. But somebody has to teach morphosyntax, and I cannot complain since I'm a public server and I have to do. My contest was for letras and not for discourse analysis, so I have to take any job that they give me.
Yeah, my only regrets are not being as interactive in this class as well, and yeah, it is something that I'm gonna be honest. I'm not like super eager to study. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to manage everything up and not to fail the module, but it's not something that I look forward to studying in the future. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, I feel like it was presented in a manner that I would be at least somewhat interested in
Yeah,
studying, but not like
yeah,
developing something else into it. But thank you
great.
very much, teacher.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, next semester I'm looking forward to having a textbook, and I'll take a look during my holidays and vacations. We work on vacations. I'll take a look into a textbook, maybe adopt a textbook. I think it will make things easier. Okay, anybody else would you like to give us a word? Uh, I guess I'll stop recording so you feel more comfortable.